It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Switzerland. Here we go. Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Switzerland's players. It's actually part 2 of the Player Media Cast, where we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that in the show notes. This episode will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we will look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. In section 2, we'll summarize surprises in the selections and review injuries. And then in section 3, we revisit the prediction of starters in light of the warm-up games. Let's begin then. Switzerland put out a 38-man preliminary squad and then reduced it little by little to 26 players. So we can also tell you who was on the preliminary squad. And let's go. We begin with, the manager, and that didn't change. So we will consider him as having made the squad. Murat Yakin then leading them through the cup. And on to goalkeepers, we had 2 definite candidates, actually, Jan Sommer and Yvonne Mbogo. Both of those were selected for the squad. And then 4 possible candidates. I was very curious to see what would happen here. And Gregor Kobel was the one who made it, the only one of the possible candidates. So Jonas Omlin, Anthony Rakiopi, and David von Balmus not making the squad there. On to defenders, and in central defense, we had 2 definite candidates, Manuel Akanji and Nico Elvedi, and both of those selected for the final squad. 2 likely candidates also, Fabian Schär was selected, and so was the other one, Cedric Zesiger. And we had a possible candidate in Besir Omaragic, and he was selected for the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut there. So just 4 central defenders for them there. Usually teams have more. However, Ricardo Rodriguez does play as a central defender when they have a 3-man backline. So that's kind of 4.5 central defenders. And Ricardo Rodriguez is normally a left back, so he is a definite candidate and was selected for the squad. His backup, Ulysses Garcia, however, only made the preliminary squad there. I was a bit surprised by that. And then we had one player, Loris Benito, who was not only possible but unlikely, but also an injury concern. We'll talk about that a bit more at the end, but didn't seem a really viable candidate anyway. Over to the right back position, and we have a definite candidate, Sylvain Widmer. Hang on, I got everything wrong here. I had him as a possible candidate here. Anyway, we'll leave him where he is. Sylvain Widmer did make the squad nevertheless. However, possible candidates, Edmilson Fernandez, he did not make the squad. Kevin Mbabu made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And Ire Comert did not make the squad. We also had the possible but unlikely Jordan Lotomba, and he didn't make the squad either. So actually, not bringing many defenders to the cup here is Switzerland. Let's see where they are heavy in candidates. So we begin with defensive midfielder Dennis Zakaria. He was an injury doubt. He was out with a hamstring injury since early May and an unknown return date. So although he was a definite candidate, we put his name in red there to indicate that he was an injury doubt. But he is selected, Dennis Zakaria. And the other defensive midfielder was at the possible but unlikely level, Ardon Jashari. And he did make the squad as well. So a bit of a surprise for us there. Central midfielders, we had Granit Xhaka as a definite candidate, and he was selected along with the other definite candidate, Remo Freuler. The likely candidate, also Michel Aebischer, was selected. So we're seeing, it looks like they sacrificed defenders for midfielders here, because our first possible candidate, Vincent Sierro, also selected for the squad. And the other possible candidate had been Juran Bislimi, and he was just selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. Over to left midfielders, we had Dan Ndoye. He's actually coded as a forward, but we moved him here, and you'll see why. He was a likely candidate for us, and he was selected. We had Filip Ugrinic, who was a possible candidate. He made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. And then a surprise with possible but unlikely Steven Zuber making the squad, and a bit of drama with him. I mean, in addition to being possible but unlikely, he had No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, we'll visit that drama when we get there. Right midfielder Renato Stefan, also selected for the squad. He was a definite candidate, more of a substitute, I must say. And up to the left attacking role. So we had a definite candidate in Ruben Vargas, but he was an injury concern. But we assume that injury concern is not so serious, because he was selected for the squad. It didn't keep him out. And then we had possible candidate Derek Kutesa, not selected even for the preliminary squad there. On the right attacking side of the field, two definite candidates in Xherdan Shaqiri, who was selected, and Zeki Amdouni, who we moved to this position, but I would say equally as much a forward, and he's coded as a forward. Anyway, Zeki Amdouni selected for the squad. Finally, we look at, we should have attacking midfielders. Yes, even though they don't use the position, there are players coded as attacking midfielders. Jibril Sow was injured, out with a broken toe. They said expected back June 30th. That's a bit late. Anyway, it does seem that injury kept him out, if not selection itself, because he hadn't been selected for recent matches. However, our seemingly off the squad Fabian Rieder was selected, surprisingly. We'll talk a bit about that in section 2. And on to forwards, we had Noah Okafor as a likely candidate. He was chosen for the final squad. And then we had Andy Zakiri as a possible candidate. He was chosen for the preliminary squad, but not making the final cut. In fact, he was the last player cut from the final roster there. Cedric Itten and Haris Seferovic were both possible but unlikely candidates, neither of them selected. But I feel smugly proud that we had predicted Breel Embolo might make a comeback here, and indeed he did. He is selected for the final squad, even though he seemed to be off the squad, having not appeared for the team since the 2022 World Cup. So Embolo coming in out of the cold a bit. And we also have a new candidate here. That is Kwadwo Dua, who we'll put on the list here. We'll introduce him in section 2 here, but there we go. And it makes me realize I forgot to introduce a central defender. Well, I said they were a bit thin in defense, but not as thin as all that, because they did bring in a new player. So let's just go back there and put him on the list. Yes, that is Leonidas Sturgiou as a new candidate. He's actually not all that new, but we'll meet him in section 2 as well. Let's finish with section 1. The last order of business here is the other players on the preliminary squad. So we have several, 1, 2, 6 players on the preliminary squad who were named to the preliminary squad and not selected. They were all new candidates to us. So I think I'll just list off the names so that their parents can be proud, but otherwise they're not going to be part of the story here. So we have 2 goalkeepers, Marvin Keller and Pascal Loretz, and we have, well, I'll just give the names: Aurel Amenda, Albion Hajdari, Brian Oko, and Joel Montero. So most of those are in their early 20s or younger, so we may see them in future tournaments or in future games. Okay, let's go to section 2 then, and we'll review the surprises here. So quite a few, actually. In defensive midfield, we have possible but unlikely Arden Jashiri selected. So we'll give a little bio information on those. Actually, we don't have any notable non-selections apart from maybe some of the goalkeepers, but even then, so we're just going straight to surprise inclusion. Ardon Jashiri has been with Switzerland since 2022 with 2 caps and plays for Luzern in Switzerland. He was actually on the squad for the World Cup in 2022, but over the past year he had not started any games and just on the bench for 1, and then he was injured for 1 with the under-21 team for 5 and not selected for 4 others. So he seemed possible but unlikely to us, but here he is. Next, Steven Zuber was selected, and he was possible but unlikely. Actually a veteran with the team, 51 goals since 2017. Not quite a veteran, but very experienced player. Plays for AEK Athens in Greece since 2022 and has been part of tournaments since the 2018 World Cup. He was a starter there. He was a sub who gained a starting position in Euro 2020 and then kind of a surprise non-selection in World Cup 2022. Over the recent period, he had returned after a year-long absence in June of 2023 and didn't start any games, but was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, and then not selected for 7 matches, including the last 5 for Steven Zuber. So not only surprising to see him selected, but we're going to see him starting the 2 warm-up games. So we're not really sure what's going on there. But we'll finish these before we get to that. Fabian Reeder has 4 caps since 2022. He plays for Reims in France, an attacking midfielder who we thought was off the team. He was selected for World Cup 2022, though, and subbed into a game there. But he had last appeared for the team in March of 2023. So we didn't expect him to be named, but here he is. Finally, Briel Embolo, and we kind of did suspect that he might be back given the situation with forwards there. So Briel Embolo, 63 caps and 13 goals since 2015, plays for Monaco in France. And the Cameroon-born player has been part of tournaments since the 2016 World Cup. A sub for the first two of those, but the Euro 2020 and World Cup 2022, he was a starter. So, and he's only, he's 27 years old. So, 28 years old perhaps, and so it was a surprise actually that he hadn't shown up since the 2022 World Cup. So whatever happened there, he's back, and one of 4 surprise inclusions. New players, we had the central defender Leonidas Sturgiou, who has actually been with the team since 2022, and he had a cap before being selected here. But his first and only appearance was as a substitute in June of 2022. So he wasn't selected for the World Cup. Sturgiou plays for Stuttgart in Germany, and a bit of a surprise to see him back in the team here. The other one is Kwadwo Dua, and he is 28 years old, so no youngster, no caps for the national team. He plays for Ludogorets Razgrad in Bulgaria. So bulking up the offense there is Kwadwo Dua. Okay, let's look at an update on injuries. Wow, we're pretty busy in this section with Switzerland. Ruben Vargas, we're going to say he recovered from injury. He's part of that the Zuber narrative, which I'll get into a bit later. Anyway, we had said he was out with a muscle injury since the last club game in May, but with an unknown return date. And he was named to the squad, and we'll come back to him. Yes. Seems to have recovered there, because he did play in the warm-up games in the second one. An injury doubt, but still on the roster. Well, perhaps Ruben Vargas is that, although he did play. Dennis Zakaria was out with a hamstring injury since early May and an unknown return date, but he was selected. So he may be coming in with an injury. We're not dead sure, but we'll put him here. The other one is Steven Zuber, and part of the drama is that he now has a calf injury that he picked up in the last warm-up game. So we don't know how serious it is. The return date is given as unknown, and he may be replaced if the injury is serious. And then finally, we have a couple of players dropped due to injury. Jibril Sow, I think they were hoping he would recover quickly enough. He has a return date of June 30th, and obviously, didn't make it. He was out with a broken toe since mid-April. So Jibril Sow, not part of this cup. And then we have a player who's injured but was not a strong candidate anyway, and that was Loris Benito, cruciate ligament tear since February, but was selected for Euro 2020, so we thought he might at least be healthy enough to return, but he is still on the injury list. So Loris Benito with several factors against him. All right, that's section 2, quite busy for Switzerland. Section 3, we revisit our predicted starters in light of the warm-up games. So in general, in the warm-up, we'll begin with the manager and talk about the warm-up games and what we think they were trying to achieve. So for the most part, it does seem like the manager was giving the starting players starting time, giving the starting players time to work together, because for the most part we see the players we expected to start on the field. However, in a couple of cases we do see some new players, some bench players given some time on the field, or players that we think are bench players. And then there's a weird situation with the left and right attacker, which is part of the drama I'm looking forward to telling you. But let's go over the goalkeepers first. So first time through, we nominated in part 1 Jan Sommer as the starting goalkeeper. In fact, in the warm-up games, it was Mvogo in game 1 and Sommer in game 2. Actually, Mvogo has been starting quite a few games recently. It didn't really dawn on us that it might be a challenge for the starting position. And to be honest, we still don't think it really is. We think they were giving Mvogo a bit of starting time, but we may be wrong. But we're still going to nominate Sommer as the starter, because we would be a bit surprised if he was left on the bench and Mvogo was the starter. But certainly Mvogo is the backup, and we had a lot of curiosity about which of the possible candidates would be there. Turns out that it's Gregor Kobel, but probably as the third string keeper there. On to central defence, and usually it's a two-man central defence, but sometimes three. In the warm-up games, in both cases, it was three. So perhaps they're planning on bringing that into the cup. When it was two, it was Akanji and Alvedi. And when it was three, it was usually those two plus Ricardo Rodriguez on the left side. That was the case in the second warm-up game, but in the first warm-up game, it was Alvedi with Akanji, Alvedi and Akanji as usual, but Fabian Schär, playing as the right-sided defender in that three-man backline. So we had nominated Akanji and Alvedi as starters anyway, and that's we're firm with that. We'll talk about Ricardo a little bit later, but we would actually put Ricardo Rodriguez now as blue if it's a three-man defense. We're a little less certain that he will be the third man in the three-man defense, because using Schär in one of the games suggests maybe a stronger desire to use him than it seemed. Okay, so that is central defense. Yeah, we don't see Fabian Schär as a starter there. He only started one of the games. Over at left back, so we'll put Rodrigo as a blue here as a central defender, but overall as a defender, as a left back, we think Ricardo Rodriguez is a definite. So as we saw, he started the second of the warm-up games in central defense there. If they do go with the four-man defense, it'll almost certainly be Rodriguez, and that's why we have him as green, showing more confidence that he'll be selected if it's a left defender role. Okay, he's the only one left over there, because the backup player Ulises Garcia, who we expected, was not chosen. Anyway, we go on to the right back role, and this started with Widmer in 2023. Then he got injured, and even when he was fit, they were still kind of trying different players in and out. And then at the end of the period, came back to Widmer, and that seems to be what they're doing. So we hadn't nominated him as a starter in part one, but given that he started both of the warm-up games, we're now confident to say that he is the starter as right back and right winger. Unlike Ricardo Rodriguez, who doesn't move up to play the winger role in recent times, Sylvain Widmer does. So anyway, he is our candidate or starter there, we think. Okay, Denis Zakaria, well, he was selected, so at least he was fit enough for that. We're talking about defensive midfielders now. And we hadn't nominated any players coded as defensive midfielders, but we put central midfielders in the same category. We felt Granit Xhaka and Remo Freuler were the definite starters, and in fact that was the two-man central defense in both of the warm-up games, so giving us more confidence with that. Actually, prior to an injury for Zakaria, He was kind of always there, but we don't think he's necessarily going to be picking up where he left off. So we're not nominating him here. We see him more as a backup going into this cup. Okay, in the left midfielder role, we did talk about that because we had a couple of candidates, and we actually put Dan Ndoye here because, well, as we said, Ricardo Rodriguez, the left back, doesn't push up to the winger role, and they tend to use a more attacking player. And I couldn't have spoken truer words because they're using a forward in that position. And Dan Ndoye played as the left winger in both of the warm-up games. So we're going to nominate him, not highlighting in green, but the slightly more doubtful blue. And that's because we're not dead sure they'll necessarily use that formation there. So Dan Ndoye starting both warm-up games, but just kind of at the likely/positive level. We'll talk about Steven Zuber, who is also on this list from left midfielder, but actually for this discussion, we're going to move him up to the right attacking role. And before we talk, the left attacking role. And before we talk about that, we'll just finish off with right midfielders. So we do have Dan Ndoye as a left winger. On the right side, though, as we said, it is the defender who always pushes up to play on that side. So Steven Widmer fills that role. Okay, left attacking role. This is where the drama begins. To our surprise, it was Steven Zuber starting both names. So we'll put him on the list where we'll put him on the list here on the left attacking list. We did have him as a possible but unlikely candidate, and we were taken by surprise. And in fact, when we saw Zuber starting as the left attacker, we thought, oh, okay, well, Vargas isn't fully recovered, and they're bringing in Zuber as an insurance policy. But then in game two, we saw that that Vargas was starting not on the left as he usually had, but starting on the right and playing for 66 minutes. So then we were really confused because it's not Zuber's not being brought in from the cold as a replacement for Vargas. So Zuber had been absent for the last 5 games, as we saw in section 2, and that absence wasn't explained by injury or anything. It was just non-selection. And to complicate matters, he picked up what seems it seems like in game 2 of the warm-up game, he picked up that calf injury. I'm saying that because he was subbed out 42 minutes in, which is an unusual time to be subbed out, and he is tagged with a calf injury, so it seems to have happened in the second warm-up game. So now he's on the injury list again. We don't know how serious it is. So whatever the manager had in mind, we think he's going to go back to Vargas on the left side, and then to one of the right attackers who will meet soon, probably Shaqiri on the right side. So we're going to downgrade Vargas to a instead of green to a blue, so a kind of a more hesitant prediction as to him being a starter. We still think he's the most likely, as we just said, but a little less confident in that now. On the right attacking side, we're a little less confident here too, because Shaqiri didn't play both games. He did play the first one, but then as we saw, Vargas played the second one. Anyway, we're going to stick with definite on Shaqiri as the right attacking midfielder, especially if Zuber is no longer an option. So there we go. And we move up to the forward line. And that remains a big mess. We talked about it in part 1, saying, I think over the 12 games that they played, Okafor had the most with just 4. So a lot of players rotating in and out of that position. And that's why we thought they might bring back Embolo, because they seem to be a lot of doubt there. Well, that remains, because in the first game they started the newcomer Dua. And then in the second game, it was Zeki Amdoumi, who is a forward, but we had moved him to a right attacker since he had been playing there quite a bit. So this position of forward seems still very unsettled. Okafor seemed to have the best chance, but didn't get a start here. And Embolo was brought back in to some surprise, but also was not the starter. So we can't begin to nominate a starter here, given the confusion. Just anxious to see who they'll select in the cup. All right, that's our run through the predictions, and I don't have any kind of summarizing thoughts, because I think I said most of those things during the podcast here. But generally a settled team, but that forward position particularly in doubt. We would like to thank Mike Kripak, Big Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.